Hello and welcome back to Big Discussions. My name is Dr. Anwar Yusuf Dunbar. I am the owner and the creator of this channel, and I am also the founder of the Big Words blog site. That information is on the banner of this channel, and actually the Big Words blog site is back up. If you check out the last video, my blog last weekend experienced its first major cyber attack. So the site, I got up, I think it was a Friday morning, and went into the site, went in there to go post something, and the site was redirecting. And I didn't know what was happening, and it was very stressful, and it took about 4 days for GoDaddy to go through there and clean it up and get it back to where it was before. And they were able to do that. And there were, two major lessons from that, which is if you have your own blog or your own site, put a firewall up around it and get a CAPTCHA so that bots can't spam you to death the way they were spamming me to death. So today is April 1st, 2019. It is, wow, it's amazing that the year is a quarter of the way over. So we have it's about 75% of this year left. It's been a busy year thus far. As you can see, I'm not in my usual surroundings. No Michigan flag, no JCSU up on the back wall behind me. I'm actually shooting this from Buffalo. This is my first video that I've ever shot from my hometown of Buffalo, and this is actually my room. This is the room that I spent the last part of my childhood in. So we moved over here. I won't say where here is, but it's on the east side of Buffalo. Those of you from Buffalo know where that is. But we moved over here when I was in the 7th grade, and my brother was a freshman in high school. And this is the room that I moved out of when I went away to college, and this is the room that I stayed in whenever I came back for visits. My mother actually moved out of this house for certain reasons, then she moved back in. And so there's a lot of history here. This is where I basically matured from a preteen into a teen, and then transitioned into my beginning stages of adulthood before moving out to go to college and to start my education. I watched the Buffalo Bills go to 4 Super Bowls and lose all 4 Super Bowls. I graduated from middle school, I graduated from high school, and here experienced some disappointments that teens experience. Got my first job. A lot of history here, and coming home is definitely a surreal experience. It's also a necessary thing to do several times a year, to see family, but also to remind myself of where I've come from and what the beginning was like, and just to maintain some perspective on life, and just to maintain some perspective on life, because you can lose that when you're away from your family, and when you're in your career, working on projects and battling for promotions. You can really lose perspective on life, and this place reminds you of your home, reminds you where you come from. So one cool thing about the last video, my brother said that it was good because I was relaxed. And that's kind of his big thing is me being relaxed, and I guess he likes to see the content creators look relaxed. Versus my father, who said that I should rehearse more. I actually picked up a copy of YouTube channels for dummies, and I am now reading about creating YouTube content from more of a scholarly perspective. Up to this point, I've just been winging it and kind of mimicking some of the things that I've been seeing from other more veteran content creators on YouTube. So one of the things I really want to learn is how to make videos with just the still shots, so you're not always seeing my face here in front of the camera. Because I have some really cool things on my blog that I want to just kind of read and present that way with a still image versus doing this format all the time. So what do I want to talk about in this one? The official title that I wrote down is Nature versus Nurture, Creating Ecosystems of Success, and how I got to my current station in life. And so who's the audience for something like this? I would say that it's parents. I would say that it's students who are in school right now looking to establish a career, and also folks who have even started their careers right now, because even once you start your career, you still need to evolve. You still sometimes need to course correct, and you still need to figure out, how you can better yourself. Perhaps you got passed over for promotions, or perhaps you didn't get that team lead position, or perhaps just something, or maybe your current position is not a good fit for you, and you need to figure out what the next one is. So this is for a broad audience. And thinking about some of the YouTube content creators that I watch, I want to shout out one in particular, Kevin Samuels, the image guy. I've been watching him a lot lately, and one of the things that he said that really resonated with me was that his channel wasn't for everybody. So he's talking to a male audience about how to better themselves, and he gets some pushback for some of the things that he says. But lately, I've been hearing him say that this channel isn't for everybody, and it's only for 20 to 30% of the men. So I kind of feel that way about some of the things that I'm producing. Maybe this stuff isn't for everybody, but it's especially for thinking and thoughtful people, curious people like me. So where did this topic come from? This topic came from my godson. I have a godson over in Prince George's County, Maryland. He's a 15-year-old, so he's a teen. And I realized I bought him a computer, and I took it over to him about 2 weekends ago. And I realized at the end of last year that he didn't have a computer, and he was on the wrong side of the digital divide. So there's something called the digital divide, where kids and families who don't have a computer at home are at a distinct disadvantage in comparison to kids and families who do have the internet and computers at home. So being the good godfather that I am, it was planted in my mind to get my godson a computer. And I was very careful with my money all throughout the government shutdown, and it was in the back of my mind. And so when the shutdown was over, I went and got him a nice computer with an i5 processor and not a 75, but a 17-inch screen. And I was just thinking that it was going to be the coolest thing for me to take this computer over to him, show him how to set it up, download the Microsoft Office, show him how to use Word, PowerPoint, Excel, and those kinds of things, and basically catch him up and give him that competitive advantage that he's been lacking. Well, I go over there and I take him the computer, but to make a long story short, there's a girl now. And it's totally natural for a 15-year-old to have a girlfriend, or to be thinking about girls, because I was thinking about that when I was 15 years old. But I'll just say that I think there's the possibility that he's growing up a little too fast. I'll just say that. You imagine the rest based upon some of the things that he shared with me and some of the things that he showed me. And I went back and got him the next weekend, and we had a chance to talk about school and what his future goals were, and where he wants his life to go. And I think he's kind of lost direction a little bit, and it all. And I'll just say that for the sake of his privacy and his mother's privacy, but it all made me think back to my start and where I was at 15 years old and what I was thinking about. And if I could summarize it, it was basically girls, basketball, and social acceptance. There was very little thought. Even though I wound up in graduate school getting a PhD, and I'm now a regulatory scientist, at that age I was lost in a way. And I couldn't see beyond the end of high school. It was all about girls, basketball, and social acceptance. So, I really wanted to just kind of do a video talking about what it was like growing up here and what things were kind of in my nurture and what things were kind of in my nature. And this is really important when we think about where we end up and how we develop and who we become and who we don't become. One last thing about my godson, because this is really important. I'm leaving an article in the description box titled, I believe it's titled, Challenging Misconceptions in Household Income, Wealth, and Privilege. And I took my godson a copy of the book, Turn $100 into $1 Million. My mentor turned it on to me, and if you have young people in your circle, I recommend you give that book to them because it introduces everything in a nice little book with visuals and everything. But toward the end of that book, it talks about once you've earned your million and you've attained wealth, basically zipping it and not advertising it to the world. So I showed my godson this, hoping that he would understand that as well. And he looked at it and he read it and he asked me, did somebody white write this? Or the person who wrote this, are they white? So something in his nurture, something in his home environment has associated keeping your wealth quiet with being white. And I think that's a very, very dangerous assumption, but it's also a very important thing to think about right now in terms of his nurture and in terms of other kids who are being nurtured to see the world that way. Basically, that being responsible with your money, keeping it quiet, not advertising it to everybody, that's a white thing. Okay, so nature versus nurture. Why is this important? I first heard about nature versus nurture in the context of homosexuality. The question would come up, or the theory would come up, that it was people were naturally born this way versus it was something that was introduced to them through some sort of sexual violation, or in case of maybe a boy grew up around too many women and was playing with dolls at an early age, vice versa. So that was the first context I heard of nature versus nurture. My mentor, in one of our first mentoring sessions, we talked about this for about an hour. And I think he wanted to introduce me to it, and he introduces all of his proteges to it, because he says that he has to unprogram. Maybe I shouldn't say this, but there are things that we've learned at home that he feels like that need to be unprogrammed, and I think that he's right. There are things that need to be unprogrammed. So, so it's important to understand and think about what things are in our nature versus what things are in our nurture. So what kinds of things were in my nurture here in this home? Love was in my nurture here. Communication. My mother was always very open with us. Always told us she loved us. Always told us she was proud of us. Education was in my nurture here. What else? Work ethic. The being conscious of going to work and also doing a good job, whether it was being outside cutting the grass or shoveling the driveway or raking the leaves or mopping or doing the dishes. We had to do all those things growing up, but just she instilled a work ethic. And I'm talking about my grandmother here as well, who stayed upstairs above us. Let's see, honesty and integrity. Those things were passed on here. Just being humane and nice to people and fair to people. Those things were passed on here in our nurture. Being given, being giving, and those are probably offshoots of attending church regularly, which we did growing up here. So these are all the things that were in our nurture. Me and my brother. Now, what things were in my nature personally? Let's see. I was always a curious kid. I was always asking questions about our family and just about the world in general. I always liked to soak up as much information as I could, even on the most trivial topics. My mentor recently pointed this out to me in the last year, that I'm very malleable and coachable. And I even got that quite a bit when I was playing basketball in high school. I remember one of my coaches at camp told me one summer that I was very coachable. That's my mother's phone ringing. Hold on. I'm gonna shut the door. One of my coaches in high school told me that I was very coachable. Well, at basketball camp, told me I was very coachable. So I've always been very malleable and very coachable. Some people are very rigid and uncoachable and unteachable, and those people have a hard time learning new things and even fitting in on teams. I was always a very reflective person. So I would always, it's in my nature to sit and think and ponder, maybe past events, maybe how I could have done something differently, maybe how I could have done something better. Some people don't do that. Some people just kind of plow straight ahead. Regardless, they don't think about what they did or what happened. And I've always been very humble. I have a fellow scientist who I'm pretty tight with, who he's moved on, but he always said, Dunbar, he said, you're very humble. You're very humble. So, those were things that were in my nurture, and those were things that were in my nature. I know I said that in reverse. But what's interesting is you can have people who grow up in the same nurture, in the same household, under the same roof, with the same values, and they can go completely in the opposite direction. So I'm not saying my brother has gone in the opposite direction of me or that he's taken a bad path, but in his way, he's kind of always had his way of doing things. And I'll just say that I think while I was a question asker, he was always the kind of person to kind of go and do things on his own volition. So I always thought of him as a shoot first and ask questions later type of guy. I was always an ask questions and shoot later type of guy. And I think that there are advantages to both. But I always thought that asking questions first was the better way to go. And again, there are advantages to both. I think about my mother and her 7 siblings. There were 8 of them. And my grandmother always used to tell me when I would sit and talk with her, she'd always tell me, all my children are very different. And that was always profound because, again, they all grew up under the same roof with the same set of values and the same teachings. And you had 8 different people basically going in 8 different directions. Some were similar, but most of the 8 usually went in different directions. That's because their natures were different. As you get older, as I got older, I realized a couple things. First thing was that, first of all, not everyone grew up the same way that I did. And so you realize that when you're dating, you really realize it there. But you also realize it when you go away to college, you have to make friends. You realize it on the job. And you realize that on several different arenas, that not everyone grew up the same. People were nurtured. People are nurtured differently. And that's a challenge sometimes in terms of getting along. But what you also realize is that your past doesn't necessarily have to dictate your future. So there are people who grew up in less than favorable surroundings or conditions, and the key for all of us is to not stay trapped in those less than favorable conditions, in our minds. And I want to shout out Kevin Samuels, the image guy. He's another YouTube content creator, and while his main sandbox is helping men to become their better selves and paying attention to their image, after watching his content, he's also very outspoken about, men becoming their better selves and not staying trapped in where they've come from. He talks about how he has 13 brothers and sisters, and his father was a Rolling Stone, which I think is very, very, very important. So I'm going to conclude this here. That's a short discussion on creating ecosystems of success, and the concepts of nature versus nurture. There's a rap artist that got murdered basically over this weekend named Nipsey Hussle. I have to be honest that I didn't really listen to his music, but it's in the news cycle now. And there's another show I listen to on YouTube called the Black Channel. It's called the Black Channel, and the host of that channel was saying that there's a lack of mentors and a lack of elders in the Black community that are passing on their wisdom to the younger people, and that those of us who have achieved some sort of success need to pass on what we know as often as possible. So I definitely see that as part of my role and part of my function and part of my mission. So with that, I'm going to conclude, and I hope you got something out of this. And if you see something in this for someone else, please pass this on. Please like, share, and subscribe. Please definitely get the likes up. And with that, I will conclude, and I will talk to you next time. Bye-bye.